The moment my son squeezed my hand under the table, I felt it. 3 short pulses, deliberate and careful. The same signal we'd used since he was 7 years old when he wanted to leave a place without making a scene. Eddie was 31 now, and we were sitting at my dining room table with his girlfriend of 4 months, Joyce Palmer. She was explaining how she helped her clients restructure their retirement accounts into alternative investment vehicles with institutional-grade returns. I'm Carl Bradley, 58 years old. Spent 20 years in the Navy, the last 8 doing financial investigations for NCIS. After retiring, I started my own insurance investigation business 12 years ago. I've seen every kind of financial scam imaginable. And I was looking at one right now, sitting across from me at my own dinner table. Joyce was talking about something called the Pacific Growth Capital Fund. She had a smooth way of speaking, practiced. She said traditional 401 kiloseconds and IRAs were leaving money on the table, and that she worked with select clients. These clients wanted real returns, not the 4 or 5% your bank advisor pushes on you. I poured more wine and asked what kind of oversight these funds had. Joyce smiled, warm and confident. She said that was actually one of the advantages. Less regulatory friction means faster capital deployment, which is where the real alpha comes from, she added, using the language but sounding rehearsed about it. Eddie was quiet through most of dinner. He'd laugh at Joyce's jokes, touch her hand when she made points. But I could see the tension in his shoulders. That boy got his poker face from me. He'd also squeezed my hand 3 times under the table, right after Joyce finished her investment pitch. We'd invented that signal after a Christmas dinner when Eddie was in 2nd grade. My brother Vince had cornered him. For 45 minutes, Vince talked about municipal water treatment systems while Eddie stood trapped in the hallway. From that night on, 3 squeezes meant, I need help getting out of this, but don't make it obvious. We hadn't used it in over a decade. He used it tonight, and that told me everything. After Joyce left, Eddie and I sat at the kitchen table. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. The shadows under his eyes were darker than usual, and he'd been quieter during dinner than normal. I know what you're thinking, he said, rubbing the back of his neck in that familiar nervous gesture. Tell me what I'm thinking, I replied, keeping my voice level and letting him take the lead. You're thinking something's off about her. About what she's proposing with my retirement money. I'm thinking I'd like to hear from you. How long has this investment conversation been going on? Eddie looked down at the table. She moved in 6 weeks ago. Said her lease ended suddenly. She needed 2 months to find a new place. I wanted her to stay, so I didn't question it. Then she started talking about my 401k. Said I was leaving serious money on the table. She showed me documents, performance charts going back 5 years. It all looked completely legitimate to me. I kept my expression neutral, but my investigative instincts were already firing on all cylinders now. How much has she asked you to move into this fund? I asked, though I suspected I knew. She hasn't asked directly yet. She's been building up to it gradually. Very patient, very professional about it. The fund has a minimum subscription of $50,000, but she said for larger commitments there's preferred allocation. Eddie, how much do you have in your 401k? I asked the question I was dreading to hear. He met my eyes directly. $240,000. My entire retirement savings from my IT career. I sat with that information for a moment. My son's entire financial future sitting in someone's crosshairs. She doesn't know what I do for a living, does she? It wasn't really a question. I told her you were retired Navy. She said that was impressive, like she already knew somehow. She didn't seem surprised or concerned that your father had military investigative experience. That tells me something important. Either she was very confident in her scheme, or very reckless. In my experience, those were often the same person. Has she shown you contracts? Anything she's asked you to sign or commit to in writing? Eddie nodded slowly. She emailed me a subscription agreement last week. Very professional looking, detailed terms and conditions. She said there was no rush, but the next intake window closes at the end of this month. Artificial urgency. The oldest trick in the fraud playbook. Real investment funds don't have intake windows that expire. I need you to forward me that email tonight, before she gets back from her yoga class. Dad, I don't want you to think I'm being naive about this. I've done my research online. Eddie, I'm not trying to tell you who to date. I'm asking you to let me look at documents. That's all. Just let me apply 12 years of investigating financial fraud to protect my son. He nodded slowly, Understanding the weight of what I was asking and why it mattered so much, the email Eddie forwarded was 12 pages long. Professional formatting, clean fonts, watermarked letterhead from Pacific Growth Capital Corporation. Registered address in Seattle, performance charts showing 5 years of returns between 15 and 22% annually. I spent 2 hours with it after Eddie went to bed, going through every detail with investigative precision. The performance chart cited no independent auditor. Red flag number 1 in any legitimate investment fund documentation. The section on investor protections referred to something called the Pacific Capital Investor Assurance Program, described in separate documents. Those documents weren't attached and weren't linked. Red flag number 2 for any serious investment opportunity. The subscription minimum was $50,000 with preferred allocation for commitments over $100,000. The fund's stated strategy involved private credit facilities secured by diversified asset portfolios, which could mean almost anything. Or it could mean nothing at all. Vague language designed to sound impressive without committing to specifics. The registered address in Seattle, when I looked it up online, was a business registration service, $40 a month mail forwarding. Not a real office, not a real firm headquarters. I called Roy Martinez at 8 a.m. Roy and I served together on the USS Nimitz during our Navy years. He'd been working financial crimes for Seattle Police Department for 15 years. We'd stayed in close professional touch. I need you to run something for me, I told him, giving Joyce Palmer's name and Pacific Growth address. Roy called back an hour later. His tone was serious, professional, and I knew the news wasn't good. She's real, and it's not good news for your son. Joyce Palmer, 32 years old, originally from Portland. Worked 2 years at a legitimate wealth management firm in San Francisco before she was terminated for cause. The firm filed a complaint with FINRA. The file was closed, but it exists in their database. What was the complaint specifically? I asked, though I was starting to suspect the pattern already. Inappropriate relationship with a client. Elderly widow, 70 years old. She convinced him to move $85,000 into an unregistered private fund. The fund didn't exist. Money was gone within 72 hours. Client was too embarrassed to press criminal charges. Family pressure to keep it quiet and move on. There it was. A practice run. She'd refined the approach and moved on to bigger, younger targets. Is Pacific Growth registered anywhere in any state? SEC filings, state securities commissions, anything legitimate? No registration in any state. No SEC filings. Nothing in any regulatory database we can access. So she's running a straight fraud operation. Question is whether we can get enough evidence before she disappears. Roy paused, and I could hear him thinking through the tactical challenges we were facing together. How close is she to making the ask for your son's money? Do we have time? Subscription agreement already sent. Month-end deadline. She's building urgency but hasn't made the final push yet. How much is at risk if she succeeds in convincing him to transfer the funds? My son's retirement savings. $240,000. Everything he's worked for in his career. Another pause. Roy and I had worked cases for years. We'd both seen families lose everything to scammers. This time it was personal, and we both understood the stakes involved for my family's future. We need to be careful about how we approach this. If she's spooked, she'll disappear completely. These operators have exit strategies. Clean backgrounds, minimal physical footprint, ability to become someone else in 48 hours. What do you need from me to make a case that will stick in court? I need Eddie to meet with her one more time. I need her on audio making the pitch. Full pitch, asking for the commitment, naming the amount, describing the timeline for transfer. All of it recorded. If Eddie records his own conversation on his own phone, that recording is admissible in court. I called Diane Foster next. Diane worked financial crimes for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division in Portland. We'd crossed paths on a case 3 years ago involving insurance fraud with a military connection. I gave her Joyce's information and all the Pacific Growth details I'd gathered from the documents. I'll run this through our database and see what comes up. Give me until this afternoon. Diane called back at 4 p.m. with information that made my stomach drop even further. Your Joyce Palmer has been very busy. 3 different cities, 2 different names over the past year. I drove to Eddie's apartment that evening. He met me at the door, already knowing from my expression. The news wasn't good, and he could read it in my face before I said a word. I told him everything. The Seattle address that was just a mail drop, the missing regulatory registrations. Roy's investigation revealing her previous victims. Diane's database search showing the multi-state pattern of fraud operations. The elderly widower in San Francisco who lost $85,000 and was too ashamed to prosecute. Eddie sat very still through all of it. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. The weight of the information was settling in, and I could see him processing the full scope. She told me she loved me, he said finally. Not angry, just quiet and thoughtful about it. The way people sound when they're processing the architecture of something they'd trusted completely falling apart. She said it last week. First time either of us had said it in the relationship. I didn't say anything immediately. There was nothing to say that would make that land any differently. He had to sit with the reality of how calculated and deliberate her emotional manipulation had been. After a while, he looked up at me with those steady eyes he'd had since childhood. What do I need to do to help catch her and protect other people from this? I explained about the recording. He needed to meet with her and let her make the complete pitch. Let her ask for the commitment, name the exact amount, describe the fund structure and transfer timeline. He couldn't overreact, couldn't tip her off, couldn't give her any reason to think anything had changed. Can you do that? Can you sit across from her for an hour knowing what you know? Eddie looked at me with the same determination he'd shown as a kid facing difficult challenges. Yeah, Dad. I can sit across from her for an hour and get what you need. He called Joyce that night and told her he'd been thinking seriously about the subscription agreement. He had some final questions before he committed and wanted to sit down properly to discuss them. Not just texting back and forth, but a real conversation about his financial future and the opportunity. She suggested coffee Thursday afternoon at their usual place. Her response was warm, unhurried, completely pleased. Everything perfectly calibrated to give him no reason to be concerned or suspicious about the meeting. Thursday morning, I drove to Eddie's apartment early. We sat at his kitchen table for the briefing. I walked him through exactly what to do, step by step, like a military operation planning session. Phone in his front shirt pocket, screen facing inward. Record from the voice memo app, not video. Let her talk. Don't rush her through any part of the presentation. If she paused, let silence sit. People fill silence when they're nervous or trying to convince someone of something important to them. Ask clarifying questions in a neutral tone. Don't be confrontational, don't be overeager about the opportunity. Be a man who's almost ready to say yes but needs those final details nailed down. How are you feeling about this? Any concerns about carrying it off convincingly? I asked him. Honestly. Angry, but calm angry. The kind where you just want to get the job done. That's exactly the right kind of energy for this. Stay in that mindset throughout the meeting. I reminded him that she was a professional manipulator who had done this successfully multiple times. She would be watching for any changes in his behavior, any signs that something was different. But she was also confident in her ability to close the deal, which could work in our favor. Eddie texted me at 4:30 that afternoon. Done. I have it all recorded. His voice on the phone was steady but thin. Adrenaline was still leaving his system gradually. He told me Joyce had been clear and complete in her presentation, more detailed than ever before. She described the fund structure in specific terms, the projected returns of 18 to 25% annually. She'd explained the intake deadline, the preferred allocation available for commitments over $100,000. Most importantly, she'd given him specific wire transfer instructions for an account at a credit union. She said the fund managers preferred to work outside the big banks because of processing efficiency. She told me my money would be working for me within 72 hours of the transfer. 72 hours. By the time anyone realized the fund didn't exist and the account was drained, she'd have had enough time to move money through enough layers to make recovery nearly impossible. I called Roy that evening and told him we had the complete recorded conversation Eddie needed. Eddie sent him the audio file within the hour using secure transfer protocols Roy had specified. Roy listened to the entire recording overnight and called me at 7:15 the next morning. It's enough evidence for arrest and prosecution. We're moving today with coordinated law enforcement. I didn't ask for the details of how the arrest would unfold. That wasn't my role anymore. Eddie and I had done our part. Now it was time for the professionals to do theirs. What I can tell you is that Joyce Palmer was arrested at Eddie's apartment Friday morning. It was 7:45 a.m. Eddie called me while it was happening from the hallway. Standing outside his own front door in socks and a t-shirt, speaking very quietly into his phone. They're inside, Dad. It's happening exactly like you said it would. She's in custody. Good. Go put on shoes. Get some fresh air. The hard part is over now. The investigation that followed revealed Joyce had run the same scheme in 4 different states. Pacific Growth was one of 3 fraudulent funds she'd used over the past 18 months. Across all her victims, 11 people total that investigators could establish, losses exceeded $1.2 million. Portland, Sacramento, and Phoenix. Always the same pattern targeting single men aged 35 to 50 with assets. Move in fast, build romantic relationship, push investment opportunities that don't exist in any regulatory database. Any arrests or convictions? Anything that stuck in court? I asked, hoping for leverage. Nothing that stuck. Victims either too embarrassed to prosecute or she was gone before anyone figured out. But we've been building a file. This could be the case that breaks it open completely. How many victims are we talking about total across all her known operations? That we know of? 7 people confirmed. Total losses around $800,000. Some of those people had already transferred money before Eddie ever met her in that coffee shop. He was the first potential victim who hadn't lost a single dollar to her sophisticated operation. 3 weeks later, Eddie came for Sunday dinner. Just the 2 of us at the same table. I made my famous chili, the recipe I'd been perfecting since he was 10 years old. We sat at the same dining room table where 4 months of calculated deception had almost succeeded. Eddie was quiet through most of dinner, but it was different quiet now. More settled, more peaceful. The kind that comes after something difficult is finished and justice has been properly served. When we were clearing dishes together, he looked at me with a thoughtful expression on his face. I keep thinking about how I didn't see it earlier, before it got to that point. You did see it. That's exactly why you used the signal we created when you were 7. I mean before it got that far. Why didn't I recognize the red flags sooner? I looked at my son, this person I'd watched grow from a boy needing secret signals, into a man who'd sat calmly across from someone trying to destroy his financial future completely. And held himself together long enough to help law enforcement take her down with recorded evidence. Eddie, she was very good at what she did. She'd done it successfully before, refined her approach. She knew exactly which psychological buttons to push. Affection, trust, the promise of exclusive financial opportunities. That's not a failure of your intelligence. That's her investing significant skill and time in deceiving you. It doesn't feel great to know I was manipulated that effectively for 4 months. It shouldn't feel great. But here's what you should hold onto from this entire experience. The moment your gut told you something was wrong, you listened to that instinct completely. You didn't talk yourself out of it. You didn't rationalize it away or ignore the warning signs. You reached out for help. That decision made everything else possible, including saving other potential victims. He nodded slowly, processing the weight of what had happened and what it meant going forward. Most people don't do that, I continued. That's the real tragedy in these financial fraud cases. Most people feel the wrongness deep down but convince themselves they're being paranoid or overly suspicious. They're embarrassed to say anything. They don't want to look foolish or admit the relationship isn't real. So they wait and hope they're wrong. And while they're waiting, the window closes completely. The money moves offshore, and the person disappears with a new identity in a different city. We sat with the sound of rain starting against the kitchen windows, a comfortable silence. Is she going to prison for what she did to all those people? Eddie asked. That's for the courts to determine. What I can tell you is the evidence is strong. The recording you made is clear. Roy says it's some of the best evidence he's seen. And there are 11 other people who now have a chance at some form of accountability. Because you didn't let her finish what she started with your retirement savings account. He was quiet for another moment, then looked up at me with a small smile. I'm glad I squeezed your hand that night and trusted you to help me figure it out. So am I and Eddie, you came to me when it mattered. That's what family does. Don't ever stop doing that, no matter how old you get or how independent you become. He smiled at that, genuine and warm, and we moved to the living room together. We watched an old Seahawks game neither of us really cared about on the television. It was just an ordinary evening at home, and after everything we'd been through, that felt perfect. There are things I want to say clearly, as someone who spent 20 years investigating crimes, and another 12 years doing it as a civilian insurance investigator dealing with financial fraud daily. Fraud like this exists because it's effective on decent people. It works on trusting, emotionally available people. People who are open to love and connection and the possibility of good things happening. The most sophisticated financial predators don't look for victims who are naive or obviously vulnerable. They look for victims who are emotionally available, financially stable, and capable of forming genuine relationships. They are patient. They build authentic warmth before making a single financial suggestion to their targets. By the time the investment conversation starts, the victim is already inside a relationship that feels real. Because in many ways it is real. The time spent together, the affection shared, the intimacy. The red flags are often only visible in retrospect or to someone outside the situation completely. Investment returns that sound too good. Anything consistently above 8 or 9% annually should prompt questions. A fund with no verifiable registration with state securities regulators or the SEC database. A business address that turns out to be a mail forwarding service, not a real office. Urgency around artificial deadlines. Reluctance to allow independent legal or financial review of all documents. These are not guarantees of fraud, but they are clear invitations to slow down and investigate. In the United States, investment funds must be registered with the SEC or state securities regulators. You can verify any fund and any advisor through the SEC Online database. It takes 3 minutes. That 3 minutes of verification could be the most important 3 minutes of your financial life. And this final thing. If someone in your life reaches out to you, however they know how, with whatever signal they have available, whatever way they can communicate concern or ask for help, please listen to them. Eddie used a hand signal we'd invented for a 7-year-old's social problem. He used it because some part of him knew he needed someone outside the situation. Someone to look at what was happening with professional eyes and objective judgment from experience. That instinct is worth more than any financial document or promised return on investment ever could be. Trust it in yourself, and protect it in the people you love most in this world. We didn't lose $1, but we almost did. The difference was a 31-year-old man sitting at a dinner table and squeezing his father's hand 3 times when something felt wrong. If your gut is telling you something, it's not nothing. It never is. Trust that instinct completely. Sometimes the most valuable protection we can give our children isn't money or advice, but teaching them to trust their instincts and reach out when something feels wrong. The strongest defense against sophisticated predators isn't suspicion or paranoia, but maintaining the kind of family bonds that make asking for help feel natural and safe.